Hello, welcome back to Factions of Fantasy. In the previous video I talked about how we would begin covering the villains of fantasy. Well, in this video I'd like to blur that line a bit. This character is either considered to be a treasonous rebel, or a national hero, depending on the worldview you ascribe to. Today we will be covering Ulfric Stormcloak, the Bear of Markarth, and the leader of the Skyrim freedom fighters, the Stormcloaks.
I fight for the men I've held in my arms, dying on foreign soil. I fight for their wives and children whose names I heard whispered in their last breath. I fight for we few who did come home, only to find our country full of strangers wearing familiar faces. I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves. I fight so that all the fighting I've already done hasn't been for nothing. I fight because I must.
Born to the Jarl of Eastmarch, Jarl Hogue Stormcloak, Ulfric grew up studying the Nordic traditions and faiths in Eastmarch's capital of Windhelm. When he was old enough, Ulfric was called upon by the ancient order of the Greybeards to journey to High Hrothgar to study the Way of the Voice. In the Nordic culture, this was considered an honor, for the Greybeards do not call upon just anyone to receive Kind's gift. The Way of the Voice was an ancient art, almost lost to the Nords, but preserved by the Greybeards. Ulfric would train under Arngeir for years to master the voice, or the Thu'um in the Dragon Tongue. While atop the throne of the world seemed a peaceful, simple life, the world below in Tamriel was not so peaceful. Emperor Titus Mede had ascended the throne in the 4th Era 168, assuming control of a weakening empire. The territories of Valenwood and elsewhere had left the empire and joined with their old ally, the Aldmeri Dominion of the Somerset Isles. Blackmarsh had seceded after the Oblivion Crisis at the end of the 3rd Era. Morrowind was still reeling from the eruption of Red Mountain in the 5th year of the 4th Era, along with subsequent invasions from Blackmarsh as retaliations for centuries of subjugation by the Dunmer. And Hammerfell was plagued by civil war. The conflicts between the crowns and the forebears left the province in utter chaos. The only stable regions in the old Septim Empire were Cyrodiil, High Rock, and Skyrim. Tensions between the Empire and the Dominion were rocky at best, but all relations fell through in the 4th Era 171, when the Dominion sent an ambassador to the Imperial City to present the new Emperor with a gift. This gift was ultimately the first blow in the conflict that would follow. The Aldmeri demanded that the Emperor disband his special guard, known as the Blades, outlaw the worship of the god Talos, and cede them the lands within Hammerfell. An outrageous request on its face, Titus Mede refused. Expecting this answer, the Aldmeri ambassador emptied a cart containing severed heads of all the Blades stationed in Somerset and Valenwood. This was the flashpoint that would spark the Great War. Feeling the call to action, Ulfric left High Hrothgar to join the war effort, much to the dismay of Arngeir, for he knew Ulfric would use the Way of the Voice in battle, a tactic Arngeir believed was an improper way to use the gift of Kine. Ulfric would fight the Dominion alongside Galmar Stonefist and Legate Ricca, two proud Nords with vastly different political views. During the Aldmeri Dominion's campaign to take the Imperial City, Ulfric would be captured, interrogated by an Altmer by the name of Elenwen. She would learn who Ulfric was and his importance to the people of Skyrim, specifically to those of Eastmarch. Ulfric would be tortured for information over and over until he finally gave in. By this time, the Imperial City had fallen to the Dominion, but the elves had told Ulfric it was his fault the city had fallen. Ulfric would eventually escape the custody of the Aldmeri, either on his own, or he was allowed to escape, if you choose to believe elven propaganda. In the 4th Era 175, after 4 years of bloody conflict, the Dominion and the Empire met to sign a treaty. The White Gold Concordat was signed under the conditions that the Empire would cede portions of Hammerfell to the elves, and that the worship of Talos, known as the God of Men, would be outlawed. The Red Guard of Hammerfell were outraged that they were sold out to the Aldmeri Dominion and seceded from the Empire, waging their own war against the elves. The Nords too were outraged, and none more so than Ulfric, that the Empire would disown their own god, for Talos was once Tiber Septim, founder of the very Empire of Man. During the war, many of the Imperial legions were called away to the front lines of Cyrodiil, leaving the other provinces undefended. With most of the conflict taking place in Cyrodiil and Hammerfell, other forces within Skyrim saw this opportunity to strike. A group of Bretons native to the western region of Skyrim known as the Reach took this chance to reclaim their ancestral home from the Nords. These Reachmen drove out the Nords living in the Reach's capital of Markarth and claimed it as their own. After the signing of the White Gold Concordat, the Nords returned home to see one of their cities seized by the Reachmen. A man named Inkmund, son of Hrolfdir, Jarl of the Reach, met with Ulfric and the Empire and pleaded with them to aid him in taking back his father's city. Ulfric obliged, and he would lead his militia into Markarth and retake it using his Thuum, driving out the Reachmen and capturing their king Madnak. Madnak would then be thrown into Sidna Mine, a silver mine turned prison. The remaining Reachmen would be scattered into the hills and crags of the region, becoming the Forsworn. This battle would be known as the Markarth Incident, and would lead the Nords to calling Ulfric the Bear of Markarth. The Empire eventually would march into the Reach, wiping out pockets of Forsworn until they made it to Markarth. Ulfric, having claimed the city, denied the Empire entrance until they would allow free worship of Talos once again. Left with no other choice, the Empire would oblige Ulfric, only to use him as a scapegoat when the Dominion eventually became aware of the worshipping. Ulfric would then be thrown in prison for openly defying the White Gold Concordat. During Ulfric's imprisonment, his father Jarl Hogg passed away. Since he was in prison, Ulfric was forced to have his father's eulogy smuggled out to be read at his funeral. Ulfric would eventually be released, and he would return to Windhelm, where he was seen as a hero to his people, and eventually be chosen as Jarl of Eastmarch. The citizens of Eastmarch demanded justice for Ulfric, and cried for war against the Aldmeri Dominion. Resentment of the Empire began to grow amongst the Nords, especially those sympathetic to Ulfric. Some time would pass, and the High King of Skyrim, Isildur, would pass away, causing a moot to be called by the Jarls, so that they may choose a new High King of Skyrim. During the moot, Ulfric urged the other Jarls to press for Skyrim's independence. Some likened his speech to being just shy of treasonous. Ultimately, the moot decided on Isilud's son, Torrig, as the new High King. Torrig was somewhat sympathetic to Ulfric's cause, but ultimately pro-Empire. Torrig would rule as High King, allowing for more imperial overreach into the Fourth Era 201, when Ulfric challenged him to a duel, to which Torrig accepted. During the duel, Ulfric used his Thuum against Torrig and killed him. According to Ulfric, in the Old Nord ways, this was a fair challenge that Torrig had willingly accepted. However, according to the imperial governor to Skyrim, General Tullius, Ulfric is nothing more than a murderer and a usurper. After the duel, Ulfric fled the capital city of Solitude, where he was allowed to escape through the front gate by the guard Ralgfir, who would be executed for his actions. Ulfric fled back to Windhelm, where he gathered his forces and became the rebel group known as the Stormcloaks. The Stormcloaks would eventually begin setting up campsites across Skyrim, where they prepared for the coming civil war. Ulfric would be making his way across Skyrim when he was ambushed at Darkwater Crossing and captured. He would be bound, gagged, and sentenced to death. As the headsmen began the executions, the dragon Alduin, the World Eater, would attack the city. Chaos erupted, and Ulfric and his men would escape back to Windhelm. Now let's talk about who Ulfric and the Stormcloaks are. In the Fourth Era, 201, Ulfric is still serving as the Jarl of Eastmarch and resides in Windhelm. Under his rule in Eastmarch, the Nordic population has become adamantly hostile to the Empire for banning the worship of Talos. To the Nords, Talos is a hero of men. Tiber Septim himself turned divine. Seeing as how the banning of his worship is brought on by the Aldmeri Dominion, most Nords are hesitant to trust elves of any kind. The Dunmer population of the city lives in a segregated section known as the Grey Quarter. To the Nords, the Dunmer are seen as cowardice for not playing a larger part of the Great War. But how could they? Their home was still reeling from the eruption of Red Mountain and the Argonian invasions. Many Dunmer fled Morrowind seeking refuge in Skyrim. The Argonians are treated even worse still, being banished beyond the city walls and forced to stay in the docks of Windhelm. Despite the open prejudice of anyone of not Nordic heritage, should the Dragonborn be of any other race and seek to join the Stormcloak cause, they will still be accepted amongst their ranks. Ulfric Stormcloak is a Nordic nationalist with dreams of returning Skyrim to the power it once held. Whether Ulfric's intended ends justify his means is up for you to decide. If you are a staunch Imperial, you may consider Ulfric to be a madman and a traitor. If you believe that Skyrim should be free from the shackles of the Imperial yoke, you may see him as a hero. Or even if you're an elven supremacist, you may see Ulfric as a useful tool to weaken the already crippled Empire. However you see Ulfric, he is a remarkably notable character in the lore of Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls as a whole, and that is why I see him as worthy of discussion. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this type of content, please feel free to like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more videos like this. Until next time.